Now, moving away from the Eurozone crisis, which is easier said than done at the moment, but world leaders have had some other pressing engagements. There was the G20 in Los Cabos in Mexico. And then a bit further down the line, something called Rio+20, obviously held in Rio de Janeiro and focused on the state of the planet. Over 100 heads of state, 50,000 delegates too, that's business players and activists, were in Rio, hoping for a new agreement to safeguard the future of the planet. It's Rio+20 because 20 years ago the first Earth Summit was held there and created the first international agreements on climate change. But what has actually changed since then? Well, the grave future outlined back in 1992 does appear to be already on us in a way. For a start, there are 1.46 billion more of us today, and the planet is already half a degree warmer. Annual carbon emissions have risen by almost 50%, which is pretty alarming. And the amount of Arctic sea ice, well, with all that heat, it's decreased by 35%. Now, in a moment, we're going to hear from one of the state delegates who made the trip to Rio. But as ever, we want to give you an idea first of the actual impact, the individuals living day to day with climate change. Gabriel Elizondo filed this report for us on the ups and downs of living off the land in Brazil.
They could be called the sand people of Brazil. And just like every morning, Cleide Santos and her husband Claudio are going fishing, crossing the sand dunes where they live to reach the river. And every day, those dunes get a little bigger. Cleide learned to fish from her father. It's deeply embedded in the culture. People here prefer to live off the land rather than live in the poverty in the city.
The pure air we breathe here is good. We're far from the city. We have more peace at night when we sleep. That's why it's good to live here.
There are under 100 families who live in Lençóis Maranhenses in the northeast of Brazil. They live in isolation, but in harmony with nature. They fish just enough to eat and raise a little cash. A solar panel is the only source of electricity. Water is pumped from natural underground reserves. But it's not an easy life. Like millions of others around the world, they live at the mercy of nature.
For the people that live here, they're used to constantly adapting to the changing weather conditions. One day it can be pouring rain, another day the sun can be baking down on the sand. Conditions are unpredictable and unforgiving. For many of the people here, they don't know what their future might hold.
Here they're sensitive to even small fluctuations in seasonal rainfall. Marinaldo Pereira shows me a lagoon that is now dry.
This winter there was not enough water to fill up the lagoons for us to fish.
And the strong winds off the Atlantic are constantly pushing the sand dunes, forcing the people to pack up and move to new areas. The community church will have to be moved before it's covered by sand. This community already abandoned.
I talk to my brother when we're standing at the top of the dunes, but probably in 10 or 15 years very few people will be here. The dunes come into the river. The fish then leave because there is little water. What are we going to live off? All we have is fishing.
While those in Rio de Janeiro for Rio+20 are discussing sustainable development and the environment in theory, the people here are living the reality.
So who's doing what about all of this? Now, Latin America editor Lucia Newman, she sat down with Mexico's Environment Minister Juan Rafael Elvira Quesada. Lots of things to talk about, but she began by asking why Mexico was pushing to get rid of fuel subsidies.
I think that Mexico, as many other countries, required to change the traditional vision of using fossil fuels. And in the case, for example, in Mexico, this use of subsidies related to agriculture or fishery is causing certain damage to environment. So if we decide to change and to work in that, we think it will be very positive, not only to Mexico, but the whole planet and the environment, and it requires certain reform structures in the case of many countries to really decide what is the new vision of the green economy, of the green growth.
Mexico is a producer of oil. So the subsidies that, in other words, what makes fossil fuels less expensive for their use seems to be something that Mexico wants to reduce. And there seems to be almost a contradiction there.
Not really, because the point is not how many oil do you have, but how can you be more efficient in the use of energetics. And in the case of Mexico, I'm talking about the diesel, which is used in fishery, or the use of electricity for pumping water in agriculture. So if we are more efficient in the use of energetics, we will be more successful and more competitive in the use of natural resources and less emissions, of course.
So what you're saying is that we need to make it economically more attractive, more viable to use clean fuel than fossil fuels. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there are a lot of opportunities. The point is how to exactly change the pace of the use of this energy. For Mexico, although we have a lot of oil, the point is not to use it for everything. And at the same time, we need to use clean energy, like the wind energy, like the solar energy at the same time. And Mexico is just demonstrated in the 2 years ago, 2010, to be the country that more wind energy was created in Latin America. So we need to move into that track in the green economy.
There seems to be an eternal contradiction between the need to eradicate poverty and the need to subscribe to a green economy. That seems to be the basis of most of the conflict here. And in Mexico, for example, your government has approved open pit mining, and that isn't precisely what one would call environmentally friendly.
Yeah, in the case of Mexico, thousands of employments have been created in the last 5-6 years. And I think that are compatible with the green economy, and the results are really very, very important. For example, the maintenance of hills, of mountains, or rivers, or lakes. You can give a lot of people employment, and at the same time, to conserve the natural resources, we are providing employment to nearly 500,000 people in Mexico in these years, and people deserves and requires some income in the rural areas and not to move into the cities or in other countries.
Mr. Minister, can we afford to wait another 20 years before the world subscribes to verifiable and concrete targets?
I don't think so. I think that what the paper says, the future we want, is not the only objective. Every country must and should work in these objectives, in the green agenda, the gray agenda, the blue agenda, I mean water, industry, natural resources, and work a lot, and not to be dependent on one document. So if the level of ambition of this document is not very high, this is not an obstacle to be working in that and work and reach the objectives that we want for our people. Mexico is providing some examples in the case of the green economy that we've got in the G20 in Los Cabos, in which Mexico is sending a very powerful signal. First, not only work in Mexico. Second, insert the green economy agenda in the G20. Third, to provide a very powerful signal to the developed world to work in the green economy track. And finally, invite the developing world to harmonize these policies in order to move all the countries around the world to the green economy.
Mexico's environment minister there basically laying out an argument that governments can facilitate change. They can put the measures in place and create an environment in which corporations can operate. Which leaves us to look at what those corporations are actually doing. Two examples for you, starting with Unilever, which may not sound familiar immediately, but if I told you it was behind names like Rexona, Sunsilk, Lipton, even Ben & Jerry's ice cream, you start to get the idea of a very, very big company. Veronica Pedrosa spoke to Unilever's Chief Operating Officer Harish Manwani, about why it had decided to put sustainability at the centre of its growth plans.
Unilever actually has a long-standing belief in the fact that doing well is also a recipe for doing good. So in many ways, doing well and doing good are two sides of the same coin. In fact, probably a lesser known fact is that for 14 years running, we've been on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index as #1 in our category. So we have a track record of actually keeping sustainability at the heart of everything that we do. Last year, we actually put together a new vision called the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which essentially talks about doubling our business and at the same time reducing our environmental impact. And we defined 3 overarching goals. The first was that we wanted to reduce our environmental impact by 50%, by half, by 2020. Number 2, we said we're going to source all our raw materials, agricultural raw materials from sustainable sources, and that's 7.5 million tons today. And thirdly, this is a holistic approach. So we said we're going to help 1 billion people get access to better nutrition and better hygiene. And this was, if you like, the 3 big goals. And under that, we had some very specific, 50 specific goals. This year, we just issued our first report, our progress report, if you like, on where we are against that. And I'm really pleased that we are making extremely good progress.
Can I ask you to go into some detail about how you can monitor your palm oil sourcing? Because this is something that is increasingly a hot button issue, I think, amongst consumers.
So if you take palm oil, for example, you have to start somewhere. So we started, first of all, by ensuring that our suppliers who we deal with know exactly what kind of palm oil we are looking at, what kind of certification processes we are looking at. The second was to create, if you like, an industry consensus around standards. And once you get going, everyone wants to do the right thing. I always believe when it comes to sustainability, it's not about competitors, it's about partnering, it's about peers. So we were amongst the first co-founders of the roundtables for sustainable palm oil. And this became the body then that really steered the industry through ensuring that we can actually move as a force. So this is one example. The second example, of course, in terms of how do we believe we can do it, at the end, we think our brands have to be at the cutting edge of social change. If our brands can't do it, then we can't do it. Why do I say that? 2 billion people use our brands every day. 2 billion people. That's our leverage. If we can do small things on our brands, which you multiply by 2 billion, it can make a big difference to this world. And I'll give you one example. When we talk about sustainability end to end, okay, we say we're going to reduce our environmental footprint by half. We're not talking only in our factories. We are making enormous progress in our factories. But we are talking from the time our products get sourced to the time our products get consumed. 2/3 of our environmental footprint happens when consumers use our brands. When they wash their clothes, when they wash themselves, when they cook, there's energy, there's water. And we've actually committed that this is what we need to optimize. And the most important thing is for us to make sure that with the use of innovation and changes in consumer behavior that we think we can influence, we will be able to make a difference on this agenda.
So that was Unilever, and now another giant you probably haven't heard of, GDF Suez, which is Europe's biggest power and natural gas company. Now, what it's doing is telling developing nations to balance their growth with move towards green technology. Why? Well, once again, here's Veronica putting that question to the company's chief executive, Gérard Mastrier.
It's clear that to grow, the ASEAN countries need energy. Without energy, without electricity, there is no growth. So all those countries need to increase their energy capacities, their electricity capacities to accompany the economic growth. Now, of course, there is several ways, several paths to do that. In some countries, especially in Europe, it is fashionable to speak about green energy. And of course, this is a natural evolution in order to deal with the climate change. But my advice would be not to go too quickly, or not to go at any price. In the ASEAN countries, there are natural resources, energy resources. There is natural gas in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Myanmar, and there is coal in many countries, especially in Indonesia. You have geothermal resources in the Philippines, in Indonesia. There is also hydro resources, and some of them are renewables, but you have also fossil fuels. And my advice would be, in order to protect the competitiveness of energy, the cost, to maintain the cost of energy, you'd better use the existing resources rather than convert too quickly to green energy, which is good, but expensive.
GDF Suez is heavily invested in Southeast Asia, as you say. Why? What do you see the prospects as being there?
We are an international group.